Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My mom passed away when I was 15. It hit us all hard, especially my dad. He was lost without her, and before I knew it, he had remarried some woman he'd only known for a few months. I guess he thought it would fill the void, but it just made things worse. This new wife, let's call her Karen, had 2 kids with my dad. I tried to be a good big sister, I really did. But Karen made it nearly impossible. She was always causing drama, picking fights with me and my dad, and making our lives miserable. Then one day, when I was 18, she just up and left, packed her bags and ran off to Texas with some drug dealer she'd met online. She left her own kids behind without a second thought. For 10 years, we didn't hear a peep from her. My dad raised the kids on his own and I helped out when I could. We were finally starting to feel like a normal family again. But then, out of the blue, Karen decided she wanted to come back. She called my dad crying about how she'd hit rock bottom and wanted to get clean. And my dad, being the soft-hearted fool he is, flew her back and paid for her rehab. After everything she'd put us through, he was just welcoming her back with open arms. I told him he was making a mistake, but he wouldn't listen. So there I was, 28 years old, living in my own place, trying to avoid Karen as much as possible. But she just wouldn't leave me alone. For weeks, she'd been bugging me about helping her pick out parts for a new computer. When I reminded her that I'd already sent her several builds on PC Part Picker, she complained that they weren't good enough and she needed something better. I asked her what exactly she was looking for, and that's when she came up with her ridiculous idea. She suggested that I sell her my PC and use the money to buy parts and make myself a new one. I told her how much my PC had cost me to build, and when I heard her offer, I was shocked. She was only willing to give me a fraction of what it was worth. I flatly refused her offer, telling her it wasn't even close to the PC's value. Karen then accused me of being selfish, claiming she needed a good computer for her job search. I stood my ground and told her she'd have to find another solution. She left me alone for a few days, and I figured she'd given up on the idea. On Tuesday night, I got home from work, ready to relax and play some Minecraft. But when I walked into my room, my heart dropped. My desk was empty. My mouse, my mechanical keyboard, all 3 of my monitors, my tower, my external hard drives, even my UPS, all gone. I immediately checked the front door security camera footage, and there she was, bold as brass, using a key to let herself into my house. About 30 minutes later, she came out carrying all my stuff and loading it into her car. I was furious. I called my dad right away. When I asked him if he'd given Karen a key to my house, he admitted that he had, but only for emergencies. I told him about how she'd used it to break in and steal all my computer equipment. He seemed shocked and asked if I was sure. I told him I had it on video and that he needed to handle this, reminding him that it was his fault she was even in our lives. He agreed to talk to her. 2 hours later, he called me back. He apologized and told me that Karen was refusing to give back my stuff. Apparently, she was claiming that I had promised to sell it to her. I told my dad that was a lie and that I'd explicitly told her no. I told him that I was going to call the cops. He told me to do whatever I felt I needed to do, so I did. I called the police and showed them the video. They took my statement and said they'd look for her. A few hours later, I got a call from the police station. They'd caught Karen at a gas station, driving drunk with a blood alcohol level of 0.27. Not only did she have all my stolen property in the car, but they also found 9 grams of meth. Talk about karma. She is now facing charges for felony DUI, possession with intent to distribute, and grand larceny. They couldn't charge her with burglary because my dad had given her the key. But honestly, I'm just glad she is finally getting her comeuppance. The only downside is that I still don't have my computer back. The police are holding it as evidence for the case. I have no idea how long it's going to take, so I've had to order myself a new PC in the meantime. After years of manipulating my dad, abandoning her kids and thinking she could just waltz back into our lives like nothing happened, She's finally hit rock bottom for real. I'm changing my locks and making it clear to my dad that no one gets a key to my place without my permission. It's time to move on and focus on my own life without her drama dragging me down. I grew up in a small town where public transportation was spotty at best. I knew the freedom a set of wheels could bring. So from the moment I turned 16, I worked every odd job I could find. Mowing lawns, babysitting, even helping out at the local library. It took 2 long years of saving every penny, but finally, I had enough for a used sedan. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. The day I drove it home was one of the proudest of my life. My parents were thrilled too, especially since it meant they wouldn't have to chauffeur me around anymore. We live on a quiet street with mostly older folks, so parking on the road was never an issue. Plus, our driveway is a pain to get into all the way around back. So there my car sat, parked proudly in front of our house. For a whole month, everything was perfect. I'd drive to school, to my part-time job at the supermarket, even take the occasional trip to the next town over just because I could. Then came that morning that changed everything. I stumbled downstairs still groggy from sleep to find my dad waiting with a grim expression. He told me that there had been an accident. Confused and worried, I asked if everyone was okay. My dad explained that it was my car that had been hit during the night. I thought he was joking at first. It had to be a prank, right? But when I rushed outside there, running the entire length of the driver's side, was a massive scrape and dent. The paint was torn away, exposing bare metal underneath. I felt sick. I asked my dad if the person who did this had left a note. He shook his head, explaining that it must have been a hit and run. I was devastated. All that hard work, and now my car was wrecked. We called the insurance company right away, but I didn't have much hope. Hit and runs were notoriously hard to solve. The next day, still feeling sorry for myself, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. That's when I noticed something odd a few houses down. Another car parked on the street had damage that looked eerily similar to mine. Same scrape pattern, same paint transfer. I ran home to tell my dad, and together we went to talk to the owner. I approached the neighbor, pointing out the damage to his car. He sighed and explained that he had woken up to the mess yesterday, lamenting that some jerk had sideswiped him and taken off. My dad chimed in, explaining that the same thing had happened to my car. He asked if we could get the neighbor's number, promising to let him know if we found out anything. The neighbor agreed, but I still wasn't optimistic. 2 weeks dragged by with no leads. Then, out of the blue, we got a call from the neighbor. He excitedly told us that his roommate had been talking to a friend who admitted she might have hit some cars the other night. When the roommate realized it was probably our street, he had immediately told the neighbor. Finally, a lead. The neighbor gave us the woman's number, and with shaking hands, I dialed. When she answered, I introduced myself as the person whose car she had hit and run from. She stammered, trying to claim that she had been planning to come back and give me her insurance information. I called her out on this lie, pointing out that it had been over 2 weeks. She then tried to blame her car, saying it had randomly turned. I scoffed at this, asking how her car had managed to randomly turn into 2 separate parked cars and why she had kept driving. When she fumbled for a response, I gave her an ultimatum. She had about 15 seconds to give me her insurance info or I'd be calling the police. She caved pretty quickly after that. Turns out she had been driving drunk that night and panicked after hitting our cars. The insurance companies took over from there. My poor car was declared totaled, but at least Karen's insurance had to pay for it. A few weeks later, I found out that Karen had lost her job due to the DUI charge that came from this incident. Apparently, she worked as a driver for a local delivery service, so the conviction meant automatic termination. I took the insurance payout and put it towards an even better car, this time with a good alarm system. And you can bet I always leave a note if I so much as tap someone's bumper. Some lessons you only need to learn once. My husband and I had been living in our apartment for about 5 years when it all started. We'd always had great neighbors before. You know, the kind who understand that paper-thin walls mean you need to keep the noise down. But then everything changed. It was just after our son was born. He was barely 6 months old when our old neighbors moved out. They'd been there forever, but they'd come into some money and decided to buy a house in the suburbs. Good for them, I thought. Little did I know what was coming next. About a week after our old neighbors left, two guys fresh out of college moved in. At first, I tried to be optimistic. Maybe they'd be considerate, right? Wrong. So wrong. The first night they were there, they threw a party. And when I say party, I mean it felt like the whole building was shaking. My baby was screaming his head off, and my husband had to be up at 5 a.m. for his teaching job. I thought I'd be reasonable and just ask them to turn it down a bit. I knocked on their door and one of them answered, looking annoyed that I'd interrupted their fun. I politely introduced myself as their neighbor and asked if they could turn the music down, explaining that the walls were thin and my baby couldn't sleep. The guy rudely dismissed my request, calling me an old crap and saying it wasn't even late. Then he slammed the door in my face. I was stunned. I could hear them laughing inside, and a moment later, the music got even louder. That's when I decided to call the police. But this was just the beginning. The next day, I overheard them through the wall. One of them was complaining about the witch next door, who called the cops on them. The other agreed, calling me a crude name and saying they'd show me, and show me they did. For the next few weeks, it was like living in a nightmare. They'd blast music at all hours, play porn loudly against our shared wall, and throw huge parties that would last until 4 a.m. My baby was constantly crying, my husband was exhausted at work, and I was at my wit's end. I tried talking to our landlord, but he was useless. He told me that the new tenants were paying good money for the apartment, and if I had a problem with them, I should handle it myself. He claimed he had better things to do. That's when I decided to fight fire with fire. Or in this case, noise was noise. I went out and bought the biggest speakers I could find. Then I waited. The next time they had a party, I let them tire themselves out. As soon as their guests started leaving and they turned off their music, I struck. I put those speakers right up against the wall and started blasting nursery rhymes at full volume. My son was loving it, dancing around in his pajamas. My husband thought it was hilarious. The jerks next door, not so much. After about an hour, there was a pounding on our door. I opened it to find one of the guys standing there, looking like he was about to explode. He angrily demanded that I turn off the lame crap immediately, threatening to call the cops if I didn't. I sarcastically replied, reminding him of when I had to call the cops on them. I suggested he go ahead and call, saying the police would love to hear about how they'd been harassing us for weeks. When he protested that I couldn't do this, I simply told him to watch me. Then I slammed the door in his face, just like he'd done to me, and turned the volume up even higher. Sure enough, the cops showed up about 20 minutes later. And wouldn't you know it, it was the same officer who'd come when I called about their party. The officer asked what the problem was, then one of the guys complained that we were blasting music and refusing to turn it off. The officer looked at me and I could see he was trying not to laugh. He asked if this was true and I confirmed that we were indeed having a little sing-along with our son, asking if there was a problem. I explained the whole situation to him and he nodded along, looking more amused by the second. The officer then addressed all of us, suggesting that it seemed like the neighbors were getting a taste of their own medicine. He proposed that everyone keep the noise down from now on, warning that next time he'd be writing up tickets for disturbing the peace. He asked if we all understood. The jerks grumbled but agreed. The next morning, as my husband was leaving for work, one of the guys confronted him in the hallway. Before I knew what was happening, he was throwing punches at my husband. The other guy was there too, filming the whole thing and yelling insults. My husband, being the better man, didn't fight back. He just tried to protect himself and get away. I called the police immediately. When the cops arrived, they arrested one guy for assault and battery. Turns out the other one was on probation for drug possession, and filming the assault got him sent back to jail. The first guy was evicted by our landlord, who suddenly seemed very concerned about the problem tenants when the police got involved. We ended up moving out a few months later. Last I heard, the apartment was still empty. I guess karma really does come back around. I've been working at this manufacturing plant for over 2 decades now. Started right out of high school thinking it'd just be a temporary gig while I figured out what I really wanted to do with my life. But time has a way of slipping by, you know? Before I knew it, I had a family to support and bills to pay. It was steady work with decent pay and benefits thanks to our union. Over the years, I've seen my fair share of supervisors come and go. Some were alright, others not so much. But this new guy, he was something else entirely. About 7 months ago, when this hotshot supervisor got transferred to our department, from day one, you could tell he had a chip on his shoulder, strutting around like he owned the place, implementing all these new rules that made no sense. I remember the first time I encountered one of his ridiculous policies. I clocked in at 7:01 a.m. instead of 7 a.m. sharp. The supervisor immediately told me I was late and that it was a write-up. I couldn't believe it and asked if he was serious, pointing out it was literally just 1 minute. He coldly replied that rules were rules and he expected everyone to be at their stations, ready to work, at exactly 7 a.m., with no exceptions. In all my years here, I'd never been written up for something so trivial, but that was just the beginning. He started nitpicking everything we did, the way we operated the machines, how we filled out paperwork, even how we took our breaks. It was like working under a microscope. One day, my buddy was filling out an incident report after a minor equipment malfunction. The supervisor came by and criticized how he was filling out the form. My buddy explained that he'd been doing it this way for 15 years without any problems. The supervisor dismissively told him that it was a problem now and ordered him to do it over and do it right this time. We all tried to keep our heads down and just do our jobs, but it was getting harder by the day. The constant criticism and micromanagement were wearing us down. Then, about a month into his reign of terror, I noticed something off about my paycheck. It seemed lighter than usual. At first, I thought maybe I'd miscalculated my overtime or something, but when I checked my pay stub, I realized I was being shorted an hour of pay every single day. I talked to some of the other guys, and they were all experiencing the same thing. We were losing about $400 a month each. For guys with families to support, that's no small change. We got together after work one day to figure out what to do. I said that this couldn't be a mistake since it was happening to all of us every single day. One of my co-workers asked if we thought the new supervisor was doing this on purpose. Another agreed that it had to be, as there was no way this could be a coincidence. I then asked if we should go to human resources. That's when one of the older guys spoke up. He suggested we hold on, explaining that he had an idea. He reminded us that we knew the guy was gunning for a promotion and proposed that we give him enough rope to hang himself. We all listened as he laid out his plan. It was risky, but if it worked, it would be sweet revenge. For the next 6 months, we kept our mouths shut. We endured the supervisor's petty rules and attitude without complaint. All the while, he kept shorting our pay, probably thinking he was so clever. I won't lie, it was tough. There were days when I wanted to march right into his office and confront him, but we stuck to the plan. Finally, the day came. The supervisor got his promotion, just like he'd been bragging about for months. He gathered us all to gloat, saying it had been a pleasure whipping our department into shape. He smugly added that he was sure we'd all miss him, but duty called and he was moving up to bigger and better things. We all nodded and congratulated him, biting our tongues so hard I'm surprised we didn't draw blood. The very next day, we went to Human Resources as a group. The HR rep greeted us and asked what she could do for us. I explained that we needed to report some discrepancies in our pay that had been going on for 7 months. The HR rep looked concerned and started pulling up our records. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. She stammered that this was extremely serious and that she needed to call in some other people right away. Within an hour, the office was buzzing with activity. The newly promoted supervisor was called in, looking smug at first, probably thinking he was going to get some kind of award. He went from cocky to terrified in about 2 seconds flat. He tried to stammer out a defense, claiming there must be some mistake and denying any wrongdoing. The HR rep cut him off, stating that there was no mistake and that the evidence clearly showed he had been systematically defrauding the employees for months. The supervisor broke down crying, begging for another chance, but it was too late. He was fired on the spot. We got every penny of our back pay, plus overtime, and a hefty settlement to keep things quiet. The company was so scared of a lawsuit or bad publicity that they bent over backwards to make things right. Last I heard, our ex-supervisor was having trouble finding work anywhere in the industry. It turns out word gets around when you try to steal from your workers. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.